Hi everyone, welcome back to another Real Reflective Practice. I am your host, Dr. Anjali Pereira, and I am the Disillusioned Medic. Hello to YouTube, hello to Facebook as well. Say hi to me if you're here. I'd love to hear your comments on tonight's practice. I am suffering a little bit from hay fever today, so I think, the pollen count is a bit high. So apologies if there is a little bit of snuffling tonight, but I'm still very excited because this is actually my 10th show, double figures, which is really cool. When I first started this, I didn't really know where it was going or how long I'd do it for. So I guess lockdown was just kicking off and it was impossible to say what would happen in the next day, let alone the next week or the next month. So yeah, it's amazing to have got here, and you guys have been so generous in your supportive messages and reaching out to me and saying how much you're enjoying these and how helpful they are. So here we are hitting a milestone, and if you'd like me to continue doing these practices, please do keep contacting me, keep sharing, keep commenting, and thank you just so much for your encouragement. It means the absolute world to me, so thank you. So for the last couple of weeks, as you know, I have started the show by reading out reflections from you, my lovely audience. So I'd like to read out another tonight from Rosie, the recovering GP. So here it goes. Dear Anjali, I quit my job last March with severe stress and anxiety. This decision was a very long time coming. I always felt conflicted about doing medicine and suffered with stress throughout my training. A friend sent me a link to one of your recent YouTube videos on hope, and I just wanted to let you know that it has made a real difference to me now, having read some of your blog as well. I have felt so alone, and now I know there really is a community of people out there like me. I also think we have some things in common. I am a romantic idealist, and I have felt called to do creative writing for years, but my creativity has felt completely stifled. I think I'm just exhausted by this process. I've struggled with all sorts of feelings since leaving, some of which you've talked about on your live streams: guilt, shame, failure, disillusionment, regret, frustration, etc. I didn't know of anywhere I could comfortably voice these feelings and feel understood and validated. I really suffered from the feeling of loneliness and not belonging that you mentioned in your disillusionment live stream. And so I didn't always feel comfortable talking to medic colleagues who can sometimes come across as slightly judgmental if they haven't shared at all in this experience. I felt there was a big stigma attached to saying, I'm not managing this, or I don't think this is for me. I think your reflective practice discussions are fantastic. I think there really needs to be a voice for the honest realities of working as an NHS doctor. They provide a very refreshing balance to the resilience propaganda campaign. Basically, I think the conversations you're having need to be had, because whether people leave because of a push or a pull, the system isn't very healthy at the moment and change is needed. As your other listeners have commented, it's toxic and must be causing harm to many highly competent and well-intentioned people. All the best, Rosie, the recovering GP. Well, Rosie, thank you so much for your message and your bravery, really, for speaking about this. Your words really move me, actually, because I, like you, I struggled with not being able to talk to people about how I was feeling. Medicine, yeah, you're right, medicine is an extremely judgmental world, and I often found that other doctors, especially more senior doctors, actually, they'd be very well-meaning in their advice to me, and they would say things like, oh, it'll get better, you just need to learn, you just need to be more resilient, and yeah, even if they have the best of intentions, it is really invalidating, like you say, to feel like you're not being heard. And yeah, I think we doctors as a profession are very good at giving advice but not very good at listening, which really is the wrong way around to be. I found that more often than not, people don't want advice, right? They just want another human being to affirm their experience. So yeah, I also love what you say about the resilience propaganda campaign. I want to cover that topic in a future live stream properly, because that is something I feel very passionately about. And yeah, it is. I think it's ridiculous. So yeah, thank you for pointing to that. I will cover that in a future stream. Yeah, I wish you all the very best, Rosie, the recovering GP, and I hope you keep writing. And thank you so much again for reaching out. And if any of you guys would like your reflections read out live on air, then please send them to me at dranjalipereira@gmail.com. Pick yourself a pseudonym like Rosie if you want to. Yeah, and I can't wait to hear from you. So let's move on to tonight's show. Tonight we are talking about the theme of identity. And for my story tonight, I am going to take you all the way back to myself at school, my 16-year-old self, when I was in year 11 and choosing my A-levels. Now, I was on track for medicine already by this point, as many of you probably were too. I'd been earmarked as one of the bright ones. So naturally, the assumption was that I would take biology, chemistry, physics, and maths, and apply to Cambridge or whatever and go to med school. Now, I hated maths, so that was absolutely off the table. And what I really loved was languages, modern foreign languages, and English as well. I loved English and English lit. I studied French and German, and I adored both of them. I mean, to this day, I still really couldn't decide which one of those languages I love best, because I think they're both so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, you can probably hear it in the way I'm speaking about them, but looking back, I see that languages brought out this passion in me. In English, I loved both writing my own fiction and analysing the writings of others. I loved the drama and the elocution bits that came with English. And with my modern foreign languages, I completely nerded out on things like grammar and vocabulary and linguistics and culture, and I was obsessed. I was constantly looking for ways to learn the new language and explore the language in new ways, like watching French and German films, for example, and then watching all of my favourite films dubbed in French and German as well. I read Harry Potter in French and German. I used to write down bits of vocabulary on bits of paper and then hide them around the house, because I knew that the sheer delight of finding them in the future would make me remember that word forever. It's a bit weird, I know, but that's how much I wanted to learn. And yeah, I invented little stories and little rhymes to help me remember grammatical rules. I learned at least 20 of Wir sind Helden songs, which is a German band that I love. And I can still sing you the French version of at least 2 of the songs from the Little Mermaid franchise, I think. So yeah, my love of languages was this huge part of my life. And I was also really good at them. I was the top language student that the school had ever seen, and that was their words, not mine. So yeah, I ended up taking all 3 sciences and French and German at AS level, and it completely burned myself out by the end of the first term. And I remember what people said to me at that time. They said things like, don't worry about the languages. The languages are great. It's great that you're good at them, but they're a hobby of yours. They're an interest. They're a personality quirk of yours. They're not a serious thing. And you could still do them on the side if you do medicine. You can just study them in your free time. Now, I know a lot of you out there are going to be thinking, LOL, at this point, because what free time, right? But I didn't know this at that time, of course. So I went along with it. And over the years at med school, of course, as the work got more intense and I got sent away to various placements in different places, my hobbies and interests became very difficult to keep up. And this devastated me. I mean, I held on as hard as I could, grasping at every opportunity to make language part of my life again, even to the extent of doing the Erasmus exchange and moving to Paris for 6 months. And even when I qualified, I really did try to keep them going. I remember working a really quite intense obs and gynae SHO rota, whilst also tutoring French in my free time and researching a novel, which was completely exhausting, but I did it because it gave my life meaning. I felt, even though I felt exhausted from the shifts, I had to do it. It gave me a chance to do what I loved, really. And when it came to the decision to leave medicine, there were, of course, many reasons for doing that. like the exhaustion and the toxic culture and the limitations. But the reason that really stood out to me, the thing that I suppose really drove me finally to do it, was this tantalizing idea that I would get to have that piece of me back again, that I'd get to play with words again and obsess about grammar and write again. Because for me, that isn't a hobby or an interest or a personality quirk. It's part of who I am. It's a fundamental part of my identity. So I can't wait to talk to you about this theme of identity tonight. And joining me to do it is a very special guest, Dr. Sarah Goulding, who is an NHS GP and a coach and mentor for doctors specialising in career changes and doctor wellbeing. I met Sarah through networking on LinkedIn, which is something I advise all doctors to do because networking is classically something that our profession is very bad at. And Sarah is just one of those people who's really down to earth and really easy to talk to. I had such a lovely chat with her when I was prepping for this practice tonight. So I am so happy that I get to introduce her to you guys. So there she is. Sarah, welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's really lovely to be here and so interesting to hear about your story, and made me just wonder how many people suppress bits of themselves or have to choose a bit that seems more valued than other bits.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I really am very excited to talk about this theme with you tonight, Sarah, because it's something that came up so much for me in leaving medicine. Oh, hi, Sophia, welcome. Oh, thank you for your congratulations. So Sarah, let's dive into this theme of identity. When we talk about identity, often what comes immediately to mind is, apart from identity theft, of course, as things like gender identity, racial identity, sexual orientation, or even cultural identity, your background, your family, and where you came from. Identity as a concept is very important for us humans, right? But we don't tend to talk about how our professions shape our identity quite as much, I don't think. And yet, if you take away sleep, the majority of our adult lives are spent at work, right? I mean, most of our time is taken up by what we do for a living. And I feel like in medicine in particular, this link between who we are and what we do is particularly strong. So I'm wondering, how do you see identity, and how in your mind does it relate to the medical profession?
Oh my goodness, how long have you got? I think it's really interesting. I think lots of us go back to when we talk about meeting doctors and talking about our journey to where we are now. And like you, I'm not where I thought I would be at this point, but that's okay. And I'm really happy with where I'm at now. But is it where the system would expect me to be? I don't think so. I think we start off and loads of us end up being sort of either self-selected. I self-selected as a medic. There was nobody else in my family. I don't remember it being mentioned at school, but naturally, if you're good at sciences, and actually I loved maths, so I was drawn that way. It becomes one of the seemingly obvious choices, and then you start having to mold yourself into the shape that you need to be to get through that hurdle, the UCAS forms, the personal statements, the doing the volunteering, not necessarily in a genuine way, because you're doing it in this slightly cynical way to get yourself into medical school. I think you have some choices over the type of places you apply to in terms of what draws you to it. And then I think relatively early on, you try to filter out, okay, where do I want to get to with this? People are desperate to fit you into a box. And you therefore play that game because you're going through the different specialities and ruling in or ruling out. I certainly felt I did not want to be a surgeon. I didn't like being, retractor girl number 2, doing my gynae rotations and spending hours on ward rounds or pre-op clerking. And I felt a lot of my choices in terms of specialities were related to stuff that I didn't like doing. And also I was a generalist at heart, and I hated the idea of stopping anything in particular. But then there's this sort of tribalism in medicine between, there are the jokes, you know, the orthopods, they're all carpenters, and how, you know, GPs are all cardi wearing softies that probably aren't very bright, you know, they're just doing it for a nice life, so that they can go and play golf at lunchtime. Ha ha, when has anybody had a lunchtime in years? So I think very early on you get into this culture where it feels that to fit in, you have to pick sides, and people then comment on what they perceive that means. I remember saying I wanted to be a GP when I was a house officer, and this surgical SHO who I got on really well with said, "Oh, you're a bit intelligent for that, aren't you?" And I was so offended, and I thought, you're about to put a flatus tube in somebody. Yeah, what's the requirement for intelligence there? And I just thought people were so keen to knock down other areas, and it made you kind of, yeah, I wouldn't say that area was toxic. I know you mentioned the toxic side of it, but I feel like you try and find your gangs, and you're so often shifted around, and you're in your teams, and you see yourself as part of that team, and that's great. And I think some of the working time directive has ruined that, and I think that's really affected people's well-being. But you try and find your clan or your tribe, and then you cling to it, because you then have to go through all of those different obstacles to get to the other side, because that is the only path. Because heaven forbid somebody might enjoy training and want to stay at a certain level that isn't consultant or fully qualified GP, or go off and do things in a different way, or part-time, or have some babies, or whatever. I think it's seen as just the done thing, and it's very hierarchical. And so your role within that process is preordained. You know, you are a junior, you do this, your responsibilities are this, we will talk to you in a particular way. And that then evolves in time.
Yeah, I mean, so many things from what you just said there are fascinating. And one of the things that I really identify with is this idea of playing the game, of jumping through hoops. And to an extent, when I look back on my life, I do wonder if medicine attracts a certain type of person, because on one hand, there were the things that I really authentically enjoyed, like languages and writing. But then on the other hand, there were the things that I was doing for my UCAS form to get into med school, you know, and there were things that I kind of enjoyed but didn't really want to do, but I did them because, you know, grade 8 piano looks good, and, you know, and that theory, music theory looks brilliant, and that sports meet or whatever is great. You know, this idea of all-rounder seems to be so attractive to med schools. And if you think about the way that they select students, they're looking for those qualities, and yet when you then get to med school, there is this overwhelming directive almost from on high to crush that out of you, because now you leave all those parts of you behind, and you become this idea, this concept of doctor. And I do remember, you know, there being so much talent in med school, you know, virtuoso violinists and people who were really into coding and all sorts of various pieces of talent that never really came to fruition, or that was slowly eroded by medicine sort of taking over, which is sad to me, really. It's sad to me that all of those identities can't exist within the same body, that somehow we are compelled to be just that one identity of doctor and leave everything else behind, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to think that it's a sort of cynical, deliberate aim to, you know, put you on this conveyor belt, strip you of all that isn't doctory. because there were some people that were, high-level sports people that were still there was a guy in a training scheme above me who was sort of an Olympic kayaker. There were people that were doing some really interesting things, but it took an almost superhuman effort to do it in top of the hours. And I think it's the hours that kind of prohibits it almost more than other stuff, because the exams are so grueling that it really takes somebody incredibly determined to do that. I think it's possible. Personally, as a student, I enjoyed going out a lot, and I enjoyed having a big lion and then watching rubbish daytime television. Whereas, when I was younger, I would do a lot more activities. I kind of felt like I needed that downtime. And also part of the new version of me was socializing and meeting all these incredible new people, and traveling when I could, in a way that I never could when I was younger. So I feel like it gave me those opportunities because of the variety of people I met. But yes, the way that you go through med school, you get shorter and shorter holidays, and so there isn't that time, and your attachments get longer and longer, and the exams get harder. I don't think the electives that we used to be able to have, which were a bit of a jolly for us, are now possible. I really feel for the current cohort that haven't been able to have one at all. I think I've always had, pretty much since qualifying, I've always had a portfolio career. And I remember vividly, there was a guy in my GP training scheme who said, I'd really love to work part-time because I have a real interest in poetry. And at the time, that blew me away. And I remember thinking, that is amazing. Wow, I really hope you do it. And actually, I don't think he ended up doing it, but just the ability to think that. And I think there are areas that are more flexible than others. I think general practice, it was very easy and accepted for me to go, oh, you know what, I'm really interested in medical education. I'm going to try that. I'm going to do some qualifications in it. I'm going to give it a go. Oh, actually, I'm a GP partner now. I don't have time, but I would love to be an appraiser. Can I try that? I went and sat in on some clinics specializing in gender identity a couple of years ago. I felt like it wasn't the right direction for me, but I felt like it's very acceptable in general practice to do those kind of things. And I'm not sure that's the case in hospital specialities as much.
Yeah, sort of not having the space to explore your identity, really, and to try different things.
Yeah, or that you have to have a particular CV in order to be valid.
Mm-hmm.
My CV's all over the place, and I love that. I've had a very rich life and lots of different opportunities, and I'm a magpie, so I've picked it up. I've traveled a lot, I've worked abroad, I've done a lot of different things. And that was okay within my speciality. And I felt like it really added to my ability to be a great doctor and have a bit more life experience. But I deliberately had to grab that. The way I went for my interviews after my house officer year, they expected me to start immediately. And I said, oh, well, actually, I applied for a gap year. Was that not on the thing? And they said, oh, we wouldn't have interviewed you if we'd known that you were applying. But now that we've given you one of our places, we better let you. I think I'm very passionate about trying to carve out those opportunities because to let you work out what that identity is, because your identity as an adult is going to be very different to that as a keen 13-year-old who has to try and meet expectations, perhaps, of adults around you, whether that's school, whether it's family, whether it's culture, or whether it's your inbuilt feeling, because a lot of us are self-driven perfectionists.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really respect that you had that approach from the beginning. That's something that I certainly didn't feel able to do. And I really wish that I had, had the courage and the kind of the foresight to really think about my identity in the way that you did in building this portfolio career. And it's funny, hearing you talk about your career as a doctor, my career now outside of medicine is very much the same. I've done lots of different things and, you know, had lots of different experiences. And so clearly this was something that I wanted, but I guess I didn't feel empowered within medicine at the time to grab that. And for me, I don't think I even really began to consider what made up my identity until it was threatened, you know. There's that moment in the Incredibles film when the mum Helen says to her children, "Your identity is your most precious possession. Protect it." And I think as a doctor, when I began to feel my profession was eroding my identity and that needed to be protected, that is when I started to really ask the question, okay, who am I and what do I want? And that was something that I had never been called to do before, really. So I couldn't answer it straight away, you know. And I think that might be part of what made it so difficult to leave medicine for me. It wasn't just leaving a job, right? It was this whole process of removing myself from this kind of ready-made, ready-to-wear identity that was doctor. That didn't really fit me properly, and then trying to figure out an identity that did fit. And it's hard, as you said before, that doctor identity is such a strong one, and then there are these strong tribal identities, and even within that identity, and you do get defined by it. People do, as you say, make presumptions about you based on it, and it follows you around, you know, even within medicine and outside of medicine. It's like being the member of a club almost, and so to put down that membership even temporarily, I think it sometimes can be immensely hard.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's such an honor to be a doctor, the position of privilege that you put in. And I think we are all very, very aware of the responsibility, the position of power that you're in, and how respected you are. You know, we are still, despite all of the bad media, one of the most trusted professions. But heavy wears the crown. You know, you take on responsibilities either knowingly or unknowingly. You may feel that, you know, in this COVID crisis, people are probably feeling that they have to be responsible for their family's health and give advice to their family. You know, are you following the rules properly? Are you keeping yourself safe? Am I looking after myself and your wider community? I think we very readily take on more and more and more, and it can really wear you down. And I think I did, as we talked before, you know, I did burn out as a GP partner, and I didn't realize that. And I thought because I was part-time, I hadn't earned being burnt out, because the only proper doctors were the ones that were full-time, or, you know, full-time hospital consultants, and that anything less than those roles was somehow less important. And, you know, I had trained myself to jump through the hoops and come out the end and say, well done me, you must be worthy and be of value because you've achieved those things. And other people will see that of me. You know, it was and I think I hear that more and more when I'm mentoring GPs or when I'm coaching people. They sort of come out the other end of training and then have this almost crisis identity where they go, oh, okay, first of all, is this the job I thought it was going to be? Because a substantive post is very different to a training post. It can be very isolating, whether in general practice or in hospitals. And then the reality of holding the burden, I think, is very, very hard. And I feel very passionately that people should have well-being as important. You know, what on your, you know, personal statement for university, what do you do to look after yourself when you get into med school? Instead of having to tick off all of these criteria, okay, what have you done to prevent burnout this time? Here are the different resources. And that it's just ingrained into what we do to look after ourselves, rather than this slightly horses bolted approach at the moment, which is really hard. They're seeing all of us leaving because it's very, very demanding, very difficult, and a lot of us become unwell because of it, and yet don't feel that they can talk about it. I certainly felt shame and guilt, as you talked about before. I've had periods of anxiety through various life events, but I didn't feel that I could talk about it because somehow we have to be the superhuman.
Yeah.
You know, heaven forbid you should be a part-time working Dr. Mum who then has to do the bake sale, do the everything, you know, like the Sarah Jessica Parker, and that I don't know how she does it with the shop-bought apple pie that she scrumpled up herself. You know, we put this superhuman cape on ourselves. And I think you have to have that recognition that you're wearing it and go, why am I doing that? And at what cost? And am I enjoying that? And do I need to? And what could I be alongside these things that actually I really do enjoy and that fills me up, and I come away feeling full of energy rather than, you know, drained and slightly dreading my next day of work or my clinic or whatever is true for people. And again, careers advisors, you know, having a yearly check-in. Okay, how's it going? Is this what you thought it was going to be? Okay, well, if it's not, what else do you think you might be interested in? And have that maybe separate from your educational supervisor, who is responsible for your progression, but also might be your referee at the end of it.
Yeah, it's kind of setting the expectation almost that it is okay to hold different identities. You don't have to just be this one thing. No, I mean, it's interesting. I think when I was at high school, the overwhelming narrative that I heard around medicine really was that it is not a job, it is a vocation. And that's something I still hear a lot today. And I completely get why people talk about it like that, because it is so vast, it's so complex, it requires so much commitment, you know, in terms of time and energy. So I do understand why it would be labeled as a vocation as opposed to a job, because it often does demand that you put medicine first, or at least put it very high on that priority list. And certainly as a doctor, I felt I simply didn't have the time or even the mental space for the other parts of me, as you mentioned, Sarah. You know, it's just I needed to decompress, and so, you know, it was partly the rotas and partly needing that time to relax. But I was missing friends' parties and family weddings and funerals, and missing out on trips with my partner. And you know, I could barely manage to keep up with these fundamental life things.
Yeah.
And you know, I felt enormously guilty because of that, even trying to pursue other parts of myself, like my interests outside of medicine, you know, when I could barely do these basic things. And so I suppose for me, this idea of vocation became very oppressive to me, because I didn't want to put medicine first. I wanted to be more than a doctor. I wanted those other pieces in my life, you know.
Yeah, and for you, it sounds like that the word vocation almost felt like a bit of a prison, because it was impelling you to do certain things that you naturally didn't want to do, whereas others might find that that's the oomph that pushes them forward through lots of discomfort to get to the other side. But I think we can be very outcomes based. You know, when you go to a lecture, they go, these are the outcomes for the talk. And we go, okay, I'm going to do this because it will get me to this place. I will do that. I will write this paper on top of this incredibly grueling schedule because that's what I need if I'm going to apply to a urology rotation. I will do this talk and I will look after the med students because I can then show I've got an interest in medical education. I will be more appointable as a consultant. So we're always encouraged to do those things. And of course, if I was going to be appointing for a job, I'd look at those things. But ultimately, you want to know that somebody's a decent person. You want to know what they're going to be like day to day. You know, what are they like in a crisis? So much of it is about how you relate to people. And I think a lot of that is knowing yourself. And I think we need to have permission, and that's from ourselves as well as the system, to just listen in and go, how am I? Or have a trusted other person that you can have that conversation, go, can I have a coffee with you? And go, can I just talk through some stuff with you? And, you just listen a bit or ask me some questions that I may not have thought of, because I think we get blinkers. We're like, eyes on the prize, go for it, don't stop till you get through it, and get out. And then all the scar tissue and the wounds and the, messy house and the whatever that's left behind you, without having permission to go, oh, I don't know if I'm liking this. And is this really where I want to end up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. It's something that I definitely noticed once I left medicine, was this need to have a goal at the end, have an end point, and that everything needed to be a means to an end, as you said. And there was no space for just trying things out. There was no space for exploration and making mistakes and just going for something because you might be a little bit interested in it. It's I think from such a young age I have been choosing things to become part of my identity as and when I need them, in order to get to another point. And then you really forget what the whole point of doing those things is, really. They stop giving you joy, they stop helping you grow as a person, developing personally and spiritually, really. And that's something that I've actively had to practice. I've had to learn how to do, and since I left medicine. I actually read an article recently in the BMJ by, I think, Partha Carr about this. He talks about this debate between whether medicine is this higher calling, or whether it's simply a very highly skilled job. And it's so interesting because he was talking about how it doesn't need to be, two separate, disparate things. And I do think that a lot of doctors, and certainly I believed, that I was part of this noble profession. I was proud of it, and that's fine. But since COVID-19 started, and there's been this whole debate around, the hero narrative and the clapping and the PPE shortage, I feel like more and more doctors are standing up and saying, actually, this is a job. This is a job, and I didn't sign up to be a martyr. Yeah. So I feel we're almost pulled in two different directions as doctors. On one side, there's this ideal of the noble profession that expects certain moral standards from us and certain behaviors. Then on the other side is the fact that we are humans who make mistakes and have weaknesses, and actually are no more tied to the profession than any other highly trained professional, like a pilot or an athlete. So these two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, in a way.
I wonder how much of the word vocation is really a very Victorian concept, and that just hasn't worn off yet. And I think sometimes talking to our parents' generation, not that my parents were born in the Victorian era, but they were brought up by parents who were or were just out of it, with this concept is you get a profession, you stay in that profession. And I do think there's a little bit of that. And I think medicine probably has stuck to it longer than other areas. This concept that, you choose your path and you stick to it. And I think that's true in not just in medicine, people who are teachers, people who are vets, people who are lawyers. I've got a friend who's a lawyer, and when she left being a lawyer, she and I both talked about how it was hard when you then move on and go, oh yeah, but I used to be a lawyer, you and I were talking about this, how, oh yeah, I'm locuming now and I'm being a mentor and an appraiser and a coach, but I used to be a partner. And this need to go back to what you perceive as being the most impressive bit. Why am I trying to do that? What about me says that I have to? Because actually, it might be that I'm making all these assumptions about other people, and they're just thinking, brilliant, you're happy, isn't that fantastic? I've got a friend who she tried all these different areas of medicine, and she just wasn't happy. And she's this incredibly vivacious, bright, competent woman who you'd have been lucky to have as your doctor. It just didn't make her happy. And she's now an award-winning landscape gardener, and I couldn't be happier for her. But I know she found it very hard. And when there was a reunion for med school, she didn't want to attend it because she felt this shame. And I think I just think, how can we allow ourselves this ability to reassess things every now and then. I think, you know, in general practice, we have quite slightly, there's the possibility of having these quite forward-thinking appraisals once a year. In theory, they can be a lovely opportunity to have a chat and go, how are you? Where are you at? How are you looking after yourself? That's certainly the bit I love, rather than a box ticking, are you Harold Shipman exercise, which I think is what lots of people see it as. Well, this isn't going to stop people being Harold Shipman, which is how revalidation was designed. But in hospitals, I think it can be a lot less formative, a lot less nurturing. And I know that's true for a lot of GPs as well. But I would love appraisals, and I know Claire Gerarda has talked about this as being a way to boost recruitment, retention, well-being. Just, you know, it's a way in, because people may not pick it up because they don't know they need it.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I'd like to read out a comment that's come through from Mutant Barbie, totally related to what Dr. Goulding said about not feeling like your burnout is justified if you're not a hospital consultant or a full-time GP. Yeah, it's really interesting going back to that idea, Sarah, about deserving, you know, feeling like you deserve that compassion. And it's something I see time and time again in doctors, this fundamental feeling of not being entitled and not deserving that. And yeah, I just wonder if you have any views on where that comes from.
I think some of it comes from this idea that this hierarchy that probably isn't spoken about, but that your goal is to be the best you can be, the most you can be, and do as much of it as possible. And that if you're doing less than that, you're somehow less worthy, or you're probably not as tired. You know, you have your down days. It might be that those part-time days you're running ragged with kids. You might have kids with chronic long-term health problems. You might be a single parent. You might have chronic long-term health problems, or be a carer to your parents. Nobody puts that into their narrative, as you say, in terms of what are the pressures on you, you know, in terms of bereavements or life events. And I think we're very, very hard on ourselves. And I think we have this expectation that no matter what, the job comes first, and that we must want to give patients our all. And
Yeah.
I don't know really where that comes from. I don't know if you have any feelings about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think coming back actually to this idea of other kinds of identity, I think a big part of my identity as a doctor was influenced by my identity as an Asian woman. You know, just speaking from that part of my experience. My family is of Sri Lankan origin, and in that culture, being a doctor is so revered. You know, it is the best possible thing you can be. It is worth sacrificing all other parts of yourself, because nothing could ever top being a doctor. And so having grown up in that environment, really with that mindset, it was very weird, because I wasn't choosing medicine because I was passionate about it, really. I was choosing it because it was the natural and the well-trodden path that, you know, a bright young Asian woman like me would be on. So in that sense, it was just a job. In that sense, it was a very business-like decision. But then when I was trying to leave medicine, that whole narrative about vocation and the noble profession and the best thing that you could possibly be, aka a doctor, that added to this sense of guilt and betrayal, really, betraying both my medical identity and my cultural identity. So it's interesting to think about how, you know, there's that intersection of our different identities and yeah, how they influence each other.
I think that's right. And I think there's also, on reflection, there's an element of, it is really hard to get into medical school. It is really hard to get onto training schemes and get the job that you want and carry on and pass the exams. So there's a real sense of pride, because when you've worked that hard and you've shown that you can do it, it's a lot to then walk away from that. And the pride that you get and the sense of achievement is astounding at times. And you think, wow, I went to my grandparents' ruby wedding anniversary, and people kept saying to my sister, "Oh, are you the doctor?" And my sister went, "Oh, no, I'm the other one."
Oh God, that's awful.
And now that's a family joke now, and she took it very well. But I was the one that they knew about or remembered, not because my sister was any less worthy. She's an absolutely wonderful, funny, smart, brilliant woman. And she always has been. But I think there's this reverential nature of, are you a doctor? And what that means, and people going, "Hi doc," and people still say that to me, even though I know them on a social basis, because to them, that is a really striking thing about me, even though I've never done any doctoring with them. I've tried very, very hard to keep my doctor hat separate to my going out with my mates hat. Not that that's easy. I think the boundaries can be incredibly difficult, and I think that can be a cause of great stress. I think some of it is our assumptions, though, and I think I spend a lot of time talking to people going, yeah, but who actually thinks those thoughts? Because sometimes we are putting words in other people's mouths that aren't there. And when you actually talk to them, they go, well, yeah, of course, if you're not happy, don't do that. Or, if you're so tired after a day of work that you can't talk for 2 hours and you spend the rest of the week worrying about going back to work, don't do it. And yet in your head, you tell yourself a story that they're thinking, oh, what a failure. If only they were a better doctor, if only they were tougher or more efficient or cared more or did things better, it wouldn't get to them as much. Or maybe they're too touchy-feely. Maybe if they were just a bit tougher. I certainly told myself those stories. And it took a lot of time to unpick those things. And I hear it time and time again from my mentees or my appraisees or my coaching clients or friends. And sometimes you have to really challenge the thoughts that you think are coming from other people.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It is this, it is so much a part of what we think about ourselves. And it makes me think, I've sort of had this conversation with myself in recent years about internalized racism and kind of thoughts that I've had about myself and kind of my background that perhaps are unhealthy and that are coming from the culture that I grew up in here in the UK. But also, I think there is this element of internalized reverentialism, or whatever you would call it, that applies to medicine, in that I had picked up on this incredible status really that you have as a doctor, and how special people see you and what they think of you, and I had internalized that narrative myself and had the same really respect and adoration almost of the profession as a child. And so me then leaving medicine felt like that there was then a kind of backlash against myself, a backlash against my own beliefs. Well, you've cut this part out of you that was so special. You've cut the noble bit out of you. You are no longer a good person, almost. It wasn't so explicit in those terms, but certainly, yeah, there's the element of you being your own worst enemy in those cases, right?
Yeah, and that if you are not this, then obviously you must be that. And, the way you're describing it, saying, if you are not hardworking and caring and empathic, because you're not a doctor, you can't be those things. Therefore, you must be selfish and mercenary. And I think medics are terrible at that, at not being a feeling that somehow it's grubby to be business-minded or want to look at life in a different way, because it's just not the way things are currently done. And yet, when you're in general practice, and if you're a partner, you have to run a small business, and we go into it and have no skills at all. Most of us are making it up as we go along. And yet somehow that confers upon you some important community badge because you are looking after the community. And yet you've only earned it by being given a job by some people who think you might be good to work with. You don't. So yeah, it's the more you unpick it, the more you can kind of look at different reasons as to why you might have ended up somewhere with really good intentions that are good for a certain period and might not be good for another. Or sometimes it's just to do with the people that you're around.
Yeah, no.
And the culture that you're within, and whether that fits with your values. I think we all have a really strong set of internal core beliefs and core values, and really uncomfortable is when they're in a situation where those beliefs, where those values don't fit or don't align with what they're doing or what they're allowed to express. And I think that fits what you're saying about how you perceived yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's absolutely that part of trying to fit in with the idea of what should be almost, and almost kind of self-perpetuating that toxic narrative. There's this quote I like by Orson Scott Card, which is perhaps it's impossible to wear an identity without becoming what you pretend to be. And I like that because to me it explains how I came to embody this identity of doctor, even though perhaps it wasn't the right one for me. I was trying to fit in with this world. So inevitably, the parts of me that didn't fit were sort of cast aside. So maybe what I'm feeling called to do tonight, talking to you, is just to be more aware of the identities I want to keep, and being okay with having several of them in my person, because in wanting them, I am becoming them. And so that awareness piece is really critical almost.
That's really interesting. I think it's trying to keep our minds as open as possible to not this perception that there is only one place that you can fit. A bit like how people feel there's only one person in the world you could possibly be happy with. I personally believe there are multiple versions, and that it's okay to be curious, be open, give yourself permission to look at that and go, what brings me joy and how can I do more of that? And that is all parts of your life, and that could be your family, it could be work, it could be nature, it could be literature, whatever. And just to give yourself permission that it is not selfish and greedy and self-involved to do those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's thank you so much, Sarah, for talking to me about this. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. And yeah, I really appreciate it. If people tonight watching want to find you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've loved talking to you. I feel like we could talk for days on this. You've got one thread, you're like, I've got to go down that thread. But yeah, the best. I'm on LinkedIn as Dr. Sarah Goulding. I'm on Instagram as Dr. Sarah Goulding with a U in it, like Ellie Goulding, the pop star. And my website is drsarahgoulding.com. So all of those areas, please do get in touch for if any of those things strikes a chord, or if I can support you or help you in any way, or if you just want to find out about my crazy interesting career so far and the things I've tried and the things I've kept and the things I've left. But please do. I'd love to talk to people.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and take care of yourself, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, that'd be lovely, Angie. Take care.
Bye, Sarah.
Bye.
Oh, wasn't she lovely? That was just such a nice conversation. Yeah, I really want to thank you guys again for coming along to another reflective practice tonight. Once again, really enjoyed myself, and it's a lovely way to celebrate the 10th show. So yeah, as always, please subscribe to my channel and like these videos if you are enjoying them. It makes a huge difference to me. You can also comment on the videos themselves, or you can @ me on Facebook or on Twitter at Disillusioned, and do send me your reflections as well. I would love to hear them at drangelipereira@gmail.com, and I'll read them out live on air. So that's all for tonight, guys. I will be back next week talking to Dr. Rohit Chitkara about curiosity. So if you're curious to know what we talk about, then join us then and tune in next time. Take care, guys. Stay inspired, and bye for now.